Welcome back to the Decipher podcast. I am Lindsay O'Donnell Welch, and I am joined today by Dave Lewis, the Global Advisory CISO with Cisco. Dave, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad that I figured out which meeting room I was actually supposed to be in, so that was fun.
Always fun on the virtual platforms. so
My reading comprehension fail.
Well, it's great to talk to you again. I think the last time we talked, we were discussing the 2022 Duo Trusted Access Report. So we've come
Yes.
a while since then. But this interview is going to be a little different. I'm talking to a bunch of CISOs across the industry about kind of the CISO role and what it means to them and what it means for security and organizations and what's going on with this responsibility in terms of the top challenges and trends. Just to start, would love to kind of hear your path into where you are right now as a global advisory CISO. And, it could be high profile, high level. I know there's a lot of ins and outs, in this industry, but would love for you to rewind us back into your background and really kind of bring us into how you found yourself in this role.
Yeah, I was going to say we could do an entire series on this. Grew up in Montreal in the 70s. No, not that far back.
Yeah.
After university, I got into computers it was, well, actually before university, I got into computers where my dad brought home an old luggable, I think it was called an Oscar, this huge computer that looked like a suitcase. And I fell in love with it and VisiCalc and all kinds of weird things like that. And it just spiraled from there. So in my professional career, I started working as a rapid application developer for a bank, and that lasted for 10 days when I discovered there was a security team. And this was a company with 55,000 employees and one security person who just happened to be sitting at the next desk over. And so I started pestering my boss to get involved in that, because at that point, was how do I put it, a self-starter in security. I had adventured around the internet. Let's just leave it at that. Um, and it really, it was a wake-up moment where I realized I could actually get paid for this. And after about, I think it was about just under 2 weeks of badgering, he finally relented and let me move over to that team. And I never looked back. And it's been really an adventure. I've done every sort of role you could imagine in security, with the exception of crypto, because math. And I was a CISO for a power company for about almost 2 years. And that was a head versus keyboard repeat kind of moment in my career, where it's like I always wanted that role, and then when it was foisted upon me quite unplanned, um, it was a bit of a shock, a jarring shock, but it has really served me well from the experiences that it taught me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. When you and talk a little bit more about that, like when you say unplanned, because it's funny when I talk to a lot of CISOs in the industry, like this is a fairly newish role, and I feel like a lot of people are kind of quote unquote voluntold a little bit to do it, or they just kind of find themselves in here, or a hole really opens up and they're trying to kind of understand what that means. So, would love to hear about your experience there.
Yeah, it was kind of surreal, because I was brought in as a pen tester for the organization, and I didn't even sit in that chair for a week when my boss at the time was relieved of duty, in that he was really removed from the building. And I was like, okay, this is interesting. And they went, okay,
Oh
it's
boy.
now your role. And I
Yeah.
was like, what? And they said, well, you have the most experience. And I said, I don't even know where the coffee maker is yet. Are you kidding me right now? And that was really my indoctrination into that role, and I'm very thankful for that opportunity. At the time, I was absolutely jarred, because it was pretty much a table flip moment,
Mhm.
going from one expectation into another. But that seems to be the nature of this industry. Is, well, historically, we go through all these different sort of changes and things like that, and there was no defined education path. Right.
Mhm.
So there was no masters of cybersecurity. There was no PhD. None of that existed. So if we wanted to learn something in security, we had to poke at it and see what broke, and then go, okay, that's bad. Let's not do that again.
Mhm.
And just read old Vax manuals and things like that. One of which I actually just got rid of about 2 weeks ago. It was in my cabinets behind me, and I just realized I'm not going to touch that again anytime soon. But we had to be
Yeah.
self-taught in a lot of ways.
Mhm.
And the programs that are available today, which are absolutely fantastic, and I absolutely love it for people coming into the industry, but it's a different mindset. We were adventurers in many ways. We were trying that undiscovered country, and now it is there's a lot of it that's already been laid out, and I'm very thankful for that because at some point in my career I'd like to retire. It's
Mhm.
many years out at this point, but um, after 30 years of doing this sort of thing for a living, you start going, okay, wait a minute. I want somebody to be able to take over. So having these programs really facilitates the ability for all sorts of people to join the industry. And the barrier to entry is much lower than it used to be. And I really am thankful for that.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a very good point. It's like succession, like cybersecurity style, trying to kind of pave the way for the next path. Did
Or
you when
I
you
just finished. My apologies. I just finished binge watching Succession, so I sort of cringed a little bit when you said Succession. I was like,
the finale? I can't give spoilers, but yeah, the finale kind of leaves you like, yeah.
pretty much, pretty much.
Yeah. But when you say self-taught, I think that's really interesting because you're right. There are in so many other industries, there's a way of, you know, different steps to get where to the next kind of part of your career. And you know exactly what you need to learn. You know the different skill sets that are needed. With the CISO role, I feel like there's a technical aspect, but there's also an organizational aspect and the business aspect. And you really need to understand both of those parts, and it's all about kind of communicating both of those parts. And how do you go about really understanding what you do need to um, learn and teach yourself when you're looking at this role?
So for me, it was I was very fortunate that I started out as a technical person, and so that from in my way of looking at it was the hard, heavy lifting part.
Hmm.
The human element is something that not everybody has an easy time with, but it's something that comes a little bit more quick. It's easier for me to pick that part up. And so as a result, I was able to work with individual groups because there's a misconception with a lot of people that CISO roles are deeply technical.
Hmm.
Having an understanding of the technical role part of the role is really a necessary piece, but you really don't get to be hands on keyboards anymore at that point. You're dealing with spreadsheets, you're dealing with budgets, you're dealing with human resources, you're dealing with legal. So you have to learn how to build those connections within those different parts of your industry, or not your industry. Well, sorry, yeah, that's fair. Within your industry, but specifically within your own organization, because you can't look at it as a siloed approach. Old school businesses were very much, this is my silo. Should never cross the floor into, the red zone versus the yellow zone, all that sort of nonsense. And we want to make sure that we are understanding how to communicate. And this is where early in my career I fell down. I was more focused on the technical aspect, and I didn't do well communicating with folks. And I realized through the benefit of having some very good mentors along the way that I had to learn to be two things: be able to let go of boxes and be able to communicate with humans. And as glib as that may sound, that's the reality of it. Because I used to build technical solutions and I wouldn't let anybody touch it because it's like if something went wrong, this is my baby.
Yeah.
But that was a problem in of itself. If I went off on vacation, all of a sudden, who's taking care of it in the event that something happens? And that was a real epiphany for me to learn to let go. That was a huge piece of the puzzle. And the other part of the puzzle was learning to work with others to build those connections, build um, relationships with other parts of the industry or and the groups within our own company. So for example, working with audit, working with compliance in order to get a project approved. I remember in one bank I was working at, the audit team was so shocked that I came to have a meeting with them that wasn't adversarial because they were
Hmm.
so used to my predecessor coming in there and just raising holy and he double hockey sticks and all that sort of fun stuff.
Yeah.
And I came to them and I said, look, this is my plan, this is what I'm looking to do, and I'm looking to get your buy-in. They were shocked because they had really been of the approach of the trophy heads of CISOs on the wall kind of thing. That was how they measured their success. So it
Hmm.
took them a while to come around, but they eventually did come around. We were able to get some good things done. But that's shows the value of that communication, and understanding the human element is absolutely essential. Especially when we're dealing with hybrid workforces, we have to make sure that we still maintain those methods of communication, not just email. Not the email has limited utility.
Hmm.
But having the ability to have conversations like we're having right now, where you see each other's face, you can pick up on nuances. It's even better when you get to have the occasional meeting in person. But we can't just dispel and just say, oh, it's going to be one way or the other. It's like, I'm going to be 100% email. You'll go completely mad.
Hmm.
And being able to have that is absolutely essential for the role, because as a CISO, a lot of what you're doing is building connections, on working on spreadsheets, working on budgets, things that may not seem like you ever wanted that, because so many times people say, oh, how do I get to be a CISO? And it's like, well, if you want a friend, buy a dog and get a Kevlar vest,
Yeah.
because people are always after you.
Yeah.
There have been so many times in the past where people said, oh, it must be security, must be the firewall, must be this, must be that.
Hmm.
And 99% of the time, it was none of the above. So
Hmm.
being able to not vilify them when they come to you with these issues, but helping them understand where the problem lies and working with them to better solutions. So you really become that interpreter between the technical folks in your team and the rest of the business and the industry at large.
Hmm. Yeah, it seems like from a CISO perspective that boundaries are being broken when you look at kind of that red tape, yellow tape, siloed, organizational aspect of it within enterprises. Do you see that same kind of transformation in other departments or areas of organizations? Do you see kind of more of an embrace or kind of a desire to work closer with and build on those relationships with the CISOs as well?
I think that we're seeing a lot of maturity in that respect within businesses, because at one point in time, it was not uncommon to hear, oh, security is a cost center.
Hmm.
Um, and now that has really shifted in many ways to understanding that it's a business enabler. Because
Hmm.
if you think about it, that your company can do things in a safe and secure manner, then you have the ability to build confidence in your customers, build confidence in your suppliers, build confidence that you can deliver your products. All of a sudden, it has shifted the mindset, and it's also enabling the business to get things done. So if you have a company that is leaking left, right, and center, and things are never getting delivered, obviously your customers are going to go elsewhere. So this is where security really has to be reframed, and in many cases it has. Obviously, retraining humans on how we approach things takes time, because
Hmm.
we're generally averse to change. But I see that change is in fact happening.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a really interesting point about kind of reframing that mindset, because I do think that the ability to go forward and say to customers or to different people, we're secure. Like, this is all the reasons why we are secure is really important now, just with all the different ransomware and data breach, different types of cyber attacks like that. So I do think that there is kind of more of an awareness that I'm seeing, at least.
Yeah, there's more of awareness. And you touched on ransomware there, and that really highlights one of the problems that the business has, in that low hanging fruit and vulnerabilities are not being addressed for long periods of time, accumulate into what I refer to as security debt. And ransomware is effectively the debt collector that comes to harvest when all of these things are not getting done. So I've worked in businesses in the past where I had a pen test done and I showed them all the results, and the business just accepted the risk because they didn't want to spend the money to fix things.
Hmm.
Unfortunately, they suffered a rather significant breach after a few months after I left. And these are the kind of things that are imminently avoidable. And part of the CISO role is to manage those sort of engagements to make sure that the communication is happening, that things are being addressed in a timely fashion.
Hmm. Yeah, and when you're working with different departments or different pieces of a business, what are some of the challenges that you're facing? I mean, you just mentioned one, which is maybe not a level of kind of awareness of the long-term risk or how important or critical this is as a priority. Are you seeing different types of concerns from kind of the CISO standpoint?
I do see other concerns, but one of the key pieces there is making sure you understand the lingua franca of the business, because the finance team, the HR team, each team has their own acronyms. Saints preserve us. But we have to make sure that we're able to understand and speak to that. And I went so far as to doing a PMP certification, which is a project management certification at one point, simply because I couldn't understand the project managers I had to contend with. So by learning how they operate, learning how they did things, I was able to counter them when they would, pull nonsense on me, which did happen quite often. But I
Hmm.
was able to frame it in terms they understood, and rather quickly I was able to right the ship for that particular business that I was working at, because there had always been this fundamental disconnect between IT, security, and the project management teams. And so we were able to move that away. Now, if we want to do a higher level abstraction of talking about what CISOs are worried about today, we are collectively worried about what's coming next. We had that catalytic event a few months back of the introduction of ChatGPT, which is an MLL, not an AI. Please, let's just sort that out right away. But it has served its purpose in that it got everybody talking. It has opened up a lot of minds to the possibilities that can be utilized with AI. Now, we're on the leading edge of a gold rush into AI, so there's a lot of interesting things being said. But it is like, we have to frame it correctly. AI for a lot of things out there is an if then else statement, and automation is absolutely fantastic, but that comes with it the human element of people panicking about the security of their jobs.
Hmm.
AI is not going to replace people; it's going to automate tasks. But in certain cases, when that task is something that they can automate, then these people are freed up to do other roles within their or concentrate on other projects within their business units, right? So AI is not something that is going to wipe things clean, because we have to be clear about AI. AI needs specifications. It needs to understand what it is supposed to be doing. And I have never seen a project delivered in my days where the requirements were clearly defined.
Hmm.
So as long as we have that issue, I don't think AI is going to take off anytime soon. There are great implementations. There are great ways to use it. Obviously, there's negative ways to use it as well, and we will see those coming to the forefront.
Hmm. Yeah, how do you see this from a CISO perspective? Like, is this something that kind of people need to keep tabs on, or or more delve into a little bit deeper from a security standpoint? Like, what are you seeing there?
Yes, I mean, we have to move away from the headlines, have to understand a little bit deeper as to what exactly is transpiring. Over the last several years, just out of my innate curiosity, I've done courses at MIT, Harvard, and Berkeley, all on this subject matter.
Hmm.
And now I see people in the social media forums, which thankfully I've backed away from, trying to explain to me what AI is, and it was just because they Googled something. It's like, no, you got to do a little bit deeper. That do a little bit more research. There are some great books out there. Like, we have to make sure that we understand what we're up against. When we talk about smart cities are a fantastic conceptual idea, but if you look at it on the inverse, it is a prison without walls,
Hmm.
right? So how is the data being used? It's very much like a
Yeah.
hammer. You can use that to build a house, or you can beat somebody about the head and neck. And
Hmm.
it's just not the tool's fault, it's just how it's being utilized. So when we're building all these beautiful monsters, we have to consider what could go wrong. And this is part of where security comes in, because security, we look at where the worst case scenarios could possibly be. And when we're
Hmm.
dealing with AI, yes, bad things can happen. I'm not going to an Arnold Schwarzenegger reference at this point, but
Yeah.
we have to be very clear that the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and we want to make sure that we're not putting down our share of bricks,
Hmm.
because we look at all this data we're harvesting, and like, how is that data being utilized? Are we empowering humanity, or are we enabling a surveillance culture? So it's like,
Hmm.
how do you find that balance? Where is the ethics for AI? And that's
Yeah.
one of the really cool things is like where we work here at Cisco. We do have the ethics of AI. We do have a document that we've specified. It was really amazing to see that stake is in the ground.
Hmm.
Um, and being on the leading edge of the gold rush, we do see a lot of organizations out there that are just diving in and not really planning out how it's going to evolve. And this is where my concern would be from a CISO role is like, are we getting ahead of our skis? Are we getting too quick that we're putting out solutions that may have a rather negative knock-on effect if we don't handle it properly right from the word go?
Hmm. Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, I know from a security perspective, I've been kind of watching these different all the different news about AI, and I've been like, huh, this looks familiar. Like we have seen this before. Just coming from cybersecurity, you're like, not sure if I like that, but it is what it is.
Very
Yeah.
true, very true.
Something you said earlier when you were talking about kind of the different acronyms that other pieces of or parts of organizations use. Obviously security has its own kind of very technical speak and know-how, and we've got APTs and RCE and all that fun stuff. When you're when you're going to other when you're going to like board members or other parts of an organization, how are you framing different cybersecurity um, parts and pieces, and what kind of language are you trying to use to express the different problems that we're facing from a security standpoint?
This is an extension of what I was talking about earlier about the lingua franca. If you were talking to a board member, you have to understand that the vast majority of them are not having any sort of IT background. They may come out of finance or whatever it happens to be. So you have to, again, understand how they expect to be communicated with and what resonates with them. So a lot of times, the easiest way to do it is boil it down in terms of risk. What is the risk to the organization? If you're running an internet bank, if you're down for a minute, if you're down for an hour, if you're down for a day, how much money is going to be lost as a result of that? What will be the impact to the business, the impact to the shareholders, impact to the staff? These are the things we have to take into account when we're talking to folks outside of our bubble. And security really does have a rather significant bubble, and we have to be very cognizant of that when we're talking to folks outside of it. Because if we're not framing the discussion in terms they're going to understand, it's going to sound like Charlie Brown's father, and we
Mhm.
want to avoid that at all costs, because the wah 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 doesn't really help.
Right. Yeah, that's so true. You know, I feel like when you're looking at some of the other challenges of a CISO, like, budget, resources, these types of things come up as well. Um, are you seeing kind of a level of support from the C-suite and interactions and relationships with the C-suite changing at all from a high level, based on, you know, different experiences you've had over the years or what you're hearing from other CISOs? I'm curious.
So the way I experienced it when I was in the CISO role is, in many ways, CISO usually was at the kids' table at the family dinner, and
Hmm.
it was never given the credibility that it was, deserving of. And now we've really fundamentally changed into that dog that caught the bumper, that car that would go down the laneway, the dog chase after it. We finally caught that, and now we got to figure out what to do with it. And the organizations are waking up to the fact that we can be the adults at the table in many ways. And this is one of the fundamental things that I saw shift over the course of the pandemic, was organizations understood the value add proposition of security, because
Hmm.
security was able to work with them to help enable them to be remote, to be hybrid very, very quickly. And they went, wait a second, they're a business enabler, not a flaming sword of justice. And we have to realize that this value add proposition is absolutely essential. And now we're seeing boards asking questions about security because they're waking up to the impact to the business. So if there is a major breach, that has, a material issue that they have to be on top of. So they may not understand how, shell code works or anything like that, but they understand that is a problem that they have to take seriously. And having
Hmm.
served on boards in the past, I understand that those boards are really focused on risk to the organization. They want to make sure that they're mitigating it as much as possible. You're never going to obviate it and get rid of it completely, but you have to figure out how to manage that. And cybersecurity is an absolute significant risk that, with the mass connectivity that we have of businesses around the world at this point, it's not something that can be given short shrift. We have to absolutely be on top of it.
Hmm. Yeah, and when CISOs are going to their organizations and approaching this topic of risk and how they can manage that, what are some of your suggestions for kind of the top things to look at within the organization from a business standpoint, but then also kind of interweaving in like the top security trends we're seeing right now, whether that's ransomware, extortion attacks, things like that.
Being honest and transparent is absolutely essential. I've
Hmm.
seen organizations in the past that would come out with reports saying, "Oh, there was 18 bazillion attacks," when they were counting every single port in a port scan as an attack, and that's
Yeah.
fundamentally flawed.
Yeah.
Because if you try to alarm people all the time, eventually they're going to go numb and they're not going to hear you anymore. You want to
Hmm.
make sure that you're going back to having proper communication, because if you want to get your message across, you want to build your business case in order to secure your environment. If you are not getting that message across in a way that's going to resonate, you've lost. And you
Hmm.
don't want to do that, because the impact from that is rather significant. We want to make sure that we're getting that message clearly across. So when you're looking at, getting your budgets and things like that, don't be alarmist. Make sure that you're asking for things that you can deliver. So if you ask for a budget of, $20 million when you only need 3, that will have a negative impact on you going forward, because as budgets are revisited, they may have issues that come up and they say, okay, we need to claw back money, but you're not actually using that money or delivering anything that has a negative financial impact on the organization. But conversely, if you are working within an organization and you have budget of, say $5 million, and another business unit is coming up short and they need $1 million, and you have a project you can put off for a little bit, you can then take some of your budget, transfer it over to them, with the caveat that in the future you get the money back. All of a sudden you have built a great connection there, because the other business unit, one, will be totally stunned that that happened, but you've built goodwill. And goodwill is a currency that you cannot do without. So if you're able to do that within your own organization without negatively impacting the organization, of course, then you are then building up a goodwill within the organization, and you're further elevating security's profile as well. So working well with others, managing your money, and making sure that you are not leading with fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Yeah, data
Hmm.
breaches happen. Yes, we get that. But you want to manage it in expectations and always framing it in terms of risk. What is the risk to the organization if you don't do X or if you do Y? And doing it in a way that is not alarmist.
Hmm. Yeah, that resonates with me just from a cybersecurity reporting perspective too. I think in the media there's kind of a lot of soul searching that journalists are trying to do right now about how we can best cover cybersecurity without being like, data breach here, data breach there, data exposure here, you know, you know, I don't know.
Yeah,
So it's tough. But
it
I
is.
think it really cuts across like every industry though, whether it's a CISO, cybersecurity journalist, or, just anyone who's working in this space. Um, okay, well, one other question that I had, and then we can wrap up here. But when you look at the CISO role and kind of how you've been involved with it over the years, how do you see that it's changed over time, and where do you see it going in the future? Do you think some of the challenges that we've talked about are getting better? Do you think that, someone who would like to be a CISO in the coming decade might have kind of it a little bit easier or more difficult on the other side of the coin? What's your thoughts?
It is definitely matured, the CISO role, from what it used to be, because again, most of us that were in the CISO role were either ex-police, or they were folks that came up through the trenches learning this, as they went. Now we have folks that have MBAs, they have proper, engineering degrees, whatever it happens to be. So they have a different perspective, and they also know how to work better with others within the, because we were scrappy bunch. We came up, swinging, the need for that was essential in the beginning, but now we're at that point where we have to, grow beyond ourselves, and making sure that we can, find a way to level up our profile, I guess, for want of a better term, as an industry, because it will be not just for the betterment of ourselves, but the betterment of all. So we always want to look at, how are we improving matters, because in security roles we tend to look at the negative because that's part of our role. I did 30 years of this. I was always seeing the dark side of everything, and thankfully my wife worked on me and sorted my brain out in the way that I'm like, oh wait, there is positive stuff in the world, because
Yeah.
we can get lost in it, right? We
Mhm.
get very mired in the worst case scenarios, the things that can go horribly wrong. But we are bringing value, And we
Mhm.
have to recognize that. And when we do stuff that adds value, when we do stuff that improves our organizations, we have to take a moment to sit back and, be in the moment, be present, and enjoy that moment. Um, because we do get really, really lost in the negative, and we want to make sure that we're improving that.
Yeah, yeah, that's a great point. And on that note, I will wrap up here so that everyone can leave, leave this podcast on a good note. But Dave, thank you so much for coming on and speaking a little bit about your experiences and any all the advice that you have and wise words.
Thank you so much for your time. Appreciate being here.
Awesome, thanks.